I moved into that apartment in late October, mostly because I didn't have a lot of options. It was an older three-story complex on the edge of town, the kind of place where nothing was seriously wrong with it, but everything was slightly off. The railings had been painted so many times that the layers were starting to bubble. The hallway carpet had dark spots that never really looked clean. The windows shut, but not tightly. If someone walked through the breezeway below my unit, I could hear the sound come up through the floor vents. It wasn't a dangerous area, exactly, just worn down. I was on the second floor near the back stairwell. One bedroom, one bath, small galley kitchen, cheap vinyl flooring in the entry and bathroom, thin beige carpet everywhere else. The apartment itself looked decent enough when I toured it in daylight. Fresh paint, new blinds. One of those staged clean smells that lasts about a day before the building's real smell starts coming through. Dust, old water, and something metallic from the pipes. The leasing agent had been honest about one thing. She told me the building had occasional plumbing issues. That turned out to mean constant plumbing issues. The first week I was there, the downstairs neighbor knocked in the evening to ask if my tub had backed up. A few days after that, somebody from maintenance came by to look under my kitchen sink because the tenant under me said water was dripping through her cabinet light. Then there was a problem with the water heater in the unit across the hall, then the washing machine line in the laundry room behind the building. It was always something wet, something leaking, something being looked into. So when the knocking started, I didn't think much of it at first. The first time it happened, it was just after midnight. I remember checking my phone because the knocking woke me out of a dead sleep. It was 12:18, 3 knocks. Not loud, not pounding, just controlled, flat knocks on the front door. I lay there for a few seconds trying to understand what I was hearing. I lived alone, and I wasn't expecting anyone. At first I thought maybe someone had the wrong apartment. Then a man's voice came through the door. Maintenance. Need to check a possible leak. I sat up and turned on the lamp beside my bed. I had work in the morning, and I was still foggy enough that the explanation made sense immediately. Leak. Plumbing. Old building. It fit. I went to the door, but I didn't open it right away. I asked who it was. He answered, "Maintenance." That was it. No name, no office, nothing else. I looked through the peephole, but the hall light outside my door was dim, and all I could really see was part of a man in a dark hoodie or jacket standing close enough that I couldn't get a full view of him. I remember seeing a ring of keys hanging from one hand. I opened the door with the chain still latched. He was a white guy, maybe 40s or 50s, average build, wearing a dark baseball cap and work pants. Not someone I recognized, but I'd only been there a couple weeks. He barely looked at me. He just said, "Tenant downstairs reported water sound in the wall behind your bathroom. I need to take a quick look." His tone was casual, almost bored, like I was making him repeat something obvious. I shut the door, took the chain off, and let him in. He walked straight to the bathroom without asking where it was. That was the first detail that bothered me later. At the time I explained it away. Same layout in every unit, probably. Not a big deal. He stepped inside, turned on the light, looked under the sink, flushed the toilet once, then stood still for a few seconds like he was listening. After that, he checked the tub faucet and ran the water maybe 10 seconds. I stood in the hallway watching him. He never really explained what he was looking for, and he didn't find anything. After maybe 2 minutes, he said, "Looks fine. They probably heard pipe movement." Then he left. No paperwork, no follow-up, no apology for waking me up. He just walked out, and I locked the door behind him and went back to bed. The next morning I mentioned it to the office when I was picking up a package. The woman at the desk just said, "Yeah, they do emergency calls sometimes." I didn't think to ask anything more specific. About a week later it happened again. This time it was later, 1:07 in the morning. Same kind of knocking. Measured. Not aggressive. I was already half awake because I'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV on. I muted it and listened. 3 knocks, then maintenance. I got up, went to the door, and asked what it was about. Smoke detector complaint. That made less sense. I said, "From who?" He answered, "Unit below you." I looked through the peephole, and it seemed like the same man, same cap, same dark clothes, same key ring hanging off one side. I opened the door with the chain on again. He said the tenant below me had complained about a chirping sound, and they were trying to figure out whether it was coming through the vent or wall. I told him my smoke detector wasn't making any noise. He nodded like that didn't matter and asked if he could just confirm. Again, I let him in. He reached up, pressed the detector button once, listened to it beep, then stood in my living room for a few seconds looking toward the kitchen and hallway. Not obviously staring, just taking in the apartment in a way I didn't like. Then he said, "You're good," and left. The next day I brought it up again, mostly because I was annoyed this was happening in the middle of the night. The same office woman was there. I asked if they could call before sending maintenance that late, unless it was an actual emergency. She looked distracted and said something like, "I can note that on your file." That was it. I told myself the building was just disorganized. That was honestly the easiest explanation. It was the kind of complex where people lost packages, work orders disappeared, and the office forgot things you told them 5 minutes earlier. I'd already had 2 emails go unanswered about a broken bathroom fan, so I figured overnight maintenance was probably another symptom of the same place being badly run. Then I started noticing the smaller things. The morning after the smoke detector visit, my bathroom medicine cabinet was open by a few inches. That doesn't sound like much, and I know that, but I never left it open. It had one of those old mirrored cabinet doors that swung wider on its own if it wasn't fully shut, and I was used to pushing it closed until it clicked against the frame. When I saw it open, I assumed I'd done it absent-mindedly while brushing my teeth. A few nights later, I got woken up again. 12:41 this time. Knock, knock, knock. I remember my stomach dropping before I even got out of bed, because by then I already knew the pattern. He said there was a complaint about water pressure. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there in the dark, just listening. Then he knocked again. Same 3 knocks, same spacing. Need to check your kitchen faucet. I looked through the peephole. Same man, or close enough that I couldn't tell the difference. I opened the door with the chain on and said, "Can this wait until morning?" He didn't answer that directly. He just said, "If it's affecting another unit, no." What bothered me was how quickly he said it. No irritation, no hesitation. Like he'd expected resistance and already had the sentence ready. I let him in because I still didn't have a clean reason not to. He went to the kitchen, turned the faucet on, switched it to hot, switched it back, opened the cabinet below the sink, and then asked where my bathroom was. That caught me off guard because he'd been in there before. I pointed anyway. He went in, stayed maybe 30 seconds, then came back out and said, "Should be fine." I asked what the issue had been. He said, "Cross-line pressure." I'm not a plumber, so that meant nothing to me. But he said it in a way that made it sound like I should already know what it was. After he left, I stayed up for almost an hour. Not because I thought I was in danger, exactly. More because I was irritated, tired, and starting to feel stupid for repeatedly letting some guy into my apartment in the middle of the night just because he had keys and said the word maintenance. The next morning I found my bedroom door almost shut. I always slept with it open. Always. The apartment was small, and I liked being able to hear the front door and the hallway outside. Closing the bedroom door made the room feel stuffy anyway, so I never did it. But when I woke up, it was pulled nearly to the frame, open only a few inches. I stood there looking at it longer than I want to admit. Then I started doing what people do when they don't want to believe something simple is wrong. I made excuses for it. Maybe I'd pulled it without thinking. Maybe it moved on its own because of a draft. Maybe when he went to the bathroom he brushed against it. All possible. Still, I bought one of those little rubber door wedges that night and started using it on the bedroom door when I slept. Not because I thought someone was coming in, just because I wanted to know if it moved. For about 10 days, nothing happened. No knocking, no maintenance, no weird excuses. I started to feel embarrassed by how much I'd let it get into my head. I even thought about how I'd explain it to someone and how paranoid it would sound. A maintenance guy came by a few times in an old building with plumbing issues. That was the whole story. Everything else was just me being alone too much in a place I didn't fully trust yet. Then my boyfriend left for a work trip. We weren't living together, but he stayed over a few nights a week. Enough that people in the building probably noticed when his car was there and when it wasn't. The first night he was gone, the knocking came back. 1:16 in the morning. Same 3 knocks. I didn't move right away. Then the voice came through the door. Maintenance. We got a complaint from downstairs. I stayed in bed, holding my phone, waiting to hear him leave. Instead, after maybe 10 seconds, he knocked again. Same exact pattern. 3 knocks. Not louder, not more impatient. Just repeated with the same rhythm, like he was following a routine. I went to the door but didn't speak. Through the peephole I could see him standing there with his head slightly angled toward the door, not shifting around, not looking at his phone, not acting like someone interrupted in the middle of an overnight call. He looked calm, familiar. Then I saw his hand move. He reached toward the lock area. I heard metal touch metal. A key ring. I said loud enough for him to hear, "I'm calling the office in the morning." His hand stopped. A few seconds later he stepped back and said, "It can wait." Then he walked away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At 9 the next morning I called the office and asked if someone from maintenance had been sent to my unit overnight. The woman who answered said she didn't know and would check. A few hours later she called me back and said there had been some after-hours issue in the building, but she didn't know details. That answer should have reassured me, but it didn't. It sounded vague in a different way than before, like she was trying to close the conversation without actually confirming anything. That night I pushed a chair under the front door knob. I know that sounds dramatic, but I didn't trust the lock anymore. Not after hearing keys at the door. I also noticed something else. The visits had only happened on nights I was there by myself. Not once when my boyfriend stayed over. Not once when my sister was visiting. Only when my car was there alone and the apartment was quiet. After that, I started keeping notes in my phone. Dates. Times. What he said he was there for. Whether I opened the door or not. I also started taking a picture of the chain latch before bed, mostly so I could stop second-guessing myself later. A few nights passed. Then one Friday, when I had fallen asleep on the couch again, I woke up to the knocking at 12:52. I didn't answer, he said. Need to inspect reported water under the bathroom floor. I stayed completely still. He waited. Then I heard the keys again, not the whole ring shaking around. Just 1 or 2 pieces of metal touching as if he was selecting the right one. I got up and made enough noise for him to hear me moving toward the door. He stopped immediately. Then he said, very flat, "We'll come back tomorrow." There was something about that sentence I still think about. Not, "I'll come back tomorrow, we'll come back tomorrow." Like he was speaking for the office. For a real process. For people who would never show up. He left, and I checked the chair, the lock, and the chain 3 separate times before going back to bed. The next morning, nothing. No one came. No note on the door. No email. No maintenance slip. Later that afternoon, I noticed the lamp in my bedroom was unplugged, not switched off. Unplugged. The cord hung down behind the nightstand where I normally never touched it. I had used that lamp the night before, and I remembered turning it off before I went into the living room. Again, I tried to explain it away. Maybe the plug had come loose while I was vacuuming earlier in the week. Maybe I'd bumped it, but I knew I was reaching. The last thing before I finally reported it properly was the chain. I'm sure about that part. That night I locked the deadbolt and fastened the chain. I remembered doing it because by then it was a habit. I even took the usual picture on my phone from inside the apartment. At some point during the night, I woke up briefly and looked toward the front door. Nothing seemed wrong. I fell back asleep. In the morning, the chain was hanging loose. Still attached to the frame side, but not set into the track on the door, just dangling. I stood there staring at it with that picture on my phone open in my hand. I went through every explanation I could think of. Maybe it hadn't caught properly. Maybe I'd slid it partway and assumed it was secure. Maybe old hardware can shake loose. All technically possible, but what got to me was that the little chair I'd put under the knob had shifted a few inches too. Not knocked over. Not dramatically moved. Just not where I'd wedged it before bed. That was the first morning I actually felt sick in my own apartment. Not panicked. Just a heavy, cold feeling that I'd missed something too many times, and whatever it was had gotten comfortable. I called the office as soon as they opened and asked to speak to the property manager, not the front desk. I had all the dates in front of me. I read them one by one. The first leak check after midnight. The smoke detector complaint. The water pressure issue. The night someone knocked and tried the key. The exact times. The fact that it only happened when I was alone. At first she responded the same way everyone there did, with that distracted tone like she was waiting for me to finish so she could explain some boring building policy. Then I gave her the specific dates. There was a pause. She asked me to repeat them. I did. Then she said, "No one should have been doing overnight maintenance in your building." I remember going quiet because I thought I'd heard her wrong. She said they had one maintenance supervisor living on site, but he only responded to calls routed through emergency dispatch, and he had not been assigned to my unit on any of the dates I gave. She also said they hadn't had scheduled overnight work in that building for months, not since some plumbing project during the summer, before I even moved in. I asked if the supervisor matched the man I described. She said no. The on-site supervisor was younger, and he drove a marked maintenance cart during the day. The person I described didn't sound familiar to her at all. Then she asked me the question I'd been avoiding asking myself. "Did you ever confirm who he was before letting him in?" I said he had keys. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she told me to call the police and said she was coming to my unit herself. When she got there, she brought the actual maintenance supervisor with her. I recognized him immediately because he was definitely not the man who'd been at my door. Different age, different build, different voice. He checked the locks first. Nothing looked damaged. No sign of forced entry. No obvious evidence that a copied key had been used. He changed the lock cylinder anyway while the manager stood in the kitchen with me asking if anything was missing. That was the strangest part. As far as I could tell, nothing was. No laptop gone. No cash missing. No jewelry taken. Nothing turned over or searched in any obvious way. If anything had been taken, it was something so small I never noticed. The officer who came later was polite but honest. He said there wasn't much they could do with no camera footage, no full name, and no confirmed entry on the nights I hadn't opened the door. He took the report, wrote down the dates, and told me not to let anyone in after hours unless I had personally confirmed it through management first. I didn't stay there much longer. My lease still had months on it, but after enough back and forth, they let me transfer to another unit in a different building on the property until I found somewhere else. Before I moved, I asked the downstairs tenant if she had actually made any of those complaints about leaks, smoke detectors, or water sounds. She looked confused and said no. She said she barely heard anything from my apartment except footsteps once in a while. I almost didn't ask one more question because by then I wasn't sure I wanted another answer, but I did. I asked if she'd ever had anyone from maintenance come by late at night. She said no. Then she asked why. I told her there had been a mix-up with work orders. That was easier than explaining it. I left that complex about 3 weeks later. There's one thing I still go back to sometimes. Not the chain, not the unplugged lamp, not even the keys at the door. It's how familiar he sounded by the end. Not friendly, just practiced. Like he'd figured out the exact tone to use with someone who lived alone in an old building where problems happened all the time. Nothing urgent enough to sound fake. Nothing serious enough to make them call anyone first. Just ordinary excuses delivered in the middle of the night, when you're tired and embarrassed and not thinking clearly. Checking a leak, testing a detector, looking at a complaint from downstairs. Simple things. Things that made sense just long enough to open the door. And what bothers me most is that if I hadn't started writing down the dates, if the chain hadn't been loose that morning, I probably would have kept explaining it away. I would have kept telling myself it was miscommunication, bad management, an old building making me jumpy. I still don't know how many times he actually came inside. I only know how many times I was awake for it. And I know that on at least one of those nights, I heard him at the door, waited in silence, and he knew exactly how long to knock before reaching for the key.